Hello, everybody. We are starting our second webinar. So how's the sound? Can you put pluses in the chat box just to make sure that you hear me all right? I'm waiting for your pluses and hope that the sound will be okay. If it's not, we're going to do something about it, but I see that this is fine. Very good, very good. So thank you very much for joining me again. A week later, here we go again, and we are going to talk a lot about vocabulary learning and teaching today, and hope you're going to enjoy it. So let's move on, but still we're going to start with a very quick revision. And there's a slide we had last time, and can you remember, can you retrieve what are these words that I put here with the first letters? So the first one, this is the first stage of putting words into long-term memory, and this thing we call noticing. Oh, thank you very much, Olga. The second stage, when we take out words from the memory, it's retrieval. And the third stage is creative use. Thank you very much. And all these three things are related to, now look at the lower two things. So things we should know about words, yeah, and all the aspects of word knowledge that we talked about. So this stands for knowledge about the word. And we talked about form, use, and meaning. And finally, there is a concept or a scientific hypothesis about how deep we should go in our knowledge. And this is the lowest term that I put here. Can you remember this? That was the second point in my presentation last time. So somebody's writing something. This is the depth of processing. Remember that the more we manipulate, yes, thank you very much, Vera, the more we manipulate words, the deeper we learn them, the more we know about them, the better we use them productively. Okay, thank you very much for that. And your home assignments. Yeah, so thank you everyone for reporting your results on your vocabulary size. I saw a couple of very impressive results. Well done, guys. Remember that there is a second test for 14,000 words. Yeah, so this is really, really challenging. You asked about the answers to the test. Well, the test doesn't provide you with a key, but I guess any dictionary can provide you with a key. So if you met words you didn't know, well, it's a nice opportunity to check them out. And yeah, I saw a couple of good examples of reorganizing your vocabulary in a vocabulary notebook. And as for your favorite dictionary, semi-corpus and corpus, in my view, the most popular one is Ludwig. So everybody is in love with Ludwig. Me too, actually. I think it's a fantastic resource. And remember that there is a video on Ludwig and on corpuses, the two of them, BNC and COCA. And the third video was about comparison of dictionaries. So I hope you watched that. If you haven't, please do. We're going to have one more video today about Quizlet. But, well, we're going to take everything in order. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start with an overture. And we're going to talk about intermediate plateau. If you don't know what it is, you will learn about it, and I will suggest a couple of ideas how to deal with this, how to overcome this. And then we're going to talk about 5 challenges of advanced learners. And in particular, I'm going to talk about one of these challenges, and it will also be related to putting your passive vocabulary into productive one. And then I promised you a huge part on revision and recycling. And there I'm going to talk about different classroom techniques and also at Quizlet. And we're going to finish with a couple of good learning habits. So very simple steps that will help you to become a better vocabulary learner. So let's go. Intermediate plateau. I hope you have seen this chart before. So this is CFR, Common European Framework for Languages. And this is a framework that divides the levels of knowledge of a foreign language into these neat steps. So you can imagine, a person climbing, at being this upper intermediate B2 stage, trying to climb C1 or C2 pillars, and they climb and they fall down and they climb again and they fall down again. Yeah, and the thing is that a very important thing happens at this stage, so between B2 and C1, and this is something a lot of learners experience, and this is what is called intermediate plateau. But actually, when we look at CFR and Cambridge, we're going to see this very neat table that says, this is taken from the official Cambridge website, that says that it takes approximately 200 guided learning hours, meaning lessons with a teacher, for a language learner to progress from one level of the Common European framework of reference to the next. 200 guided learning hours, so 200 hours of lessons. Yeah, so you can count how many lessons you may have taken or you may teach to your students. But the thing is that this is a very, very rough estimate, and I would dare to say that this is a bit far from the reality. Later, I'm going to show you the vocabulary size for each of these levels, and you will see that actually the amount of vocabulary progresses not that neatly from into elementary levels to intermediate, from intermediate to advanced. But in fact, when you are at the intermediate level and you want to progress further, the amount of vocabulary is just overwhelming. Yeah, so it raises not proportionally, but I would say in a geometric progression almost, or arithmetic progression, to be honest. I don't remember the difference between them. Yeah, so it's not that neat. Yeah, and if we see that, okay, so 1,000 teaching hours and you're going to be at proficiency level, well, there's a huge question mark here. Is it realistic? Well, yeah, for some learners, and there all the ifs come. Yeah, and these ifs, so Cambridge also mentioned this ifs or howevers. Yeah, and they say that, however, there is a number of factors that can affect how long it will take to increase your level of English, including your language learning background. Again, maybe English is the 10th language that you study. Well, it's quite a rare case, but okay, nobody said it's impossible. The intensity of your study, yeah, so how much you study, your age. Again, there is a lot of research about the differences of learning, of success in learning, depending on your age. Again, in my opinion, the role of age is a bit overestimated, because there are lots of examples of people who have been very successful in their learning, in the language learning. 30 plus, 40 plus, 60 plus, 60 plus of age. And of course, the amount of study exposure outside of lesson times. So again, that the learners who work a lot on their own, autonomous learners, are usually those who make progress the quickest and achieve best results. Okay, but back to the plateau effect. So this is when we see those figures or those neat tables that say that, well, 200 hours and you are there at the next level. We imagine our progress like the table, like the graph on the left. Yeah, so we think that it's steady progress, and and it develops a need over time. Well, in fact, in reality, our learning curve can be the one on the right. So we learn a lot, we continue working a lot on our language, but the returns, yeah, so the effects and the results are actually are not that needed, not that visible, yeah. And all these things can cause a bit of well, I would say even depression, because your motivation, so people's motivation start to drop, and people notice that they need to spend more time on language with less visible progress. And this is why their motivation starts to drop, because they work, 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 but they don't see progress in the way they saw it, let's say, from beginners to elementary, from elementary to pre-intermediate level, and so on. And also they start to be anxious about using more authentic materials. So again, at this moment, you maybe recognize yourself when you think that, okay, well, yeah, I need to try to read authentic materials, like articles in newspapers, unabridged books, but somehow you start to be afraid of that, yeah, and say, oh, probably I'm not yet ready, probably I need to learn a bit more. Well, you start reading and it seems to be too difficult for you, and you're anxious and you stop doing it, yeah. So some people just never cross this line, they never push themselves to use authentic materials. And so the necessity to expand and enrich their vocabulary is also a very daunting task, because we talk about not hundreds of words, but we talk about thousands of words. And finally, so many people, for let's say non-professionals, so those people who use English not for professional purposes, for teaching or for translating or interpreting, they just comfortably stop at this intermediate, upper intermediate level, because it's usually enough for their needs. Yeah, and this all leads to intermediate plateau. Yeah, that we're getting stuck at this upper intermediate level and we don't process further. What can we do about it? Yeah, that's the question. So first of all, we need to be aware of that. We need to know that it exists, that the problem exists, that most of the people who learn a language to a higher levels have experienced this in this or that form. And what can we do about it? So first of all, we have to sort out our motivation. So think about why you started learning in the first place. What were your goals when you started? So is it just your love of language, or is it your willingness to, I don't know, watch films with English subtitles or without subtitles at all, to, I don't know, to enjoy literature, unabridged literature in the language that you learn, and so on. So, or your goals may be professional, yeah, you might want to be a better teacher, better expert in language, and so on. So think about your motivation and think how it can help you to go on. Very helpful in the sorting out of your motivation is setting a clear, achievable, and realistic goal. And I highlighted these three adjectives because they are very, very important here. Because your goals in language learning, not even at this intermediate plateau, but in any other, at any other levels, should be clear, achievable, and realistic. And because if you set the goals very vaguely, you don't know how to measure your success. And think about all these, particularly adult learners, who come to you and say, well, I want to speak English freely, and this is it, and this is your goal. So you have to ask them in what particular situations. So what do you mean by freely? Yeah, so you have to talk through these things as what exactly is what they want, and then set a clear and achievable goal for, let's say, the next academic year or 6 months or whatever. Yeah, so there should be a realistic time span. Yeah, because when you say, well, in 5 years you're going to be fluent, that's a bit demotivating. Yeah, and in the case of our intermediate plateau, you know, this pre-advanced or lower advanced, I think that exams are a very good solution for a clear, achievable, and realistic goal, because exams give you a very viable and visible result. Because, well, you know that when you get a certificate, let's say CAE or CPE or maybe IELTS with a high score, this is a document, yeah. So this is something that you can show to your employer or to your clients or to anyone interested, and to take the exam and to pass the exam. This is a very, very good goal, because you can boost your motivation, you can prepare for it more intensively, rather than just, you know, like floating while saying, well, I'm just learning language here and there. And finally, what we can do about it is to develop good learning habits. Yeah, so those I'm gonna talk about at the end of our webinar today. And finally, practice more. Don't be too soft on yourself, because again, we may always find excuses. We may complain that we don't have time, that we are overworked, that our families need our attention and support. There are ways of practicing more, not just by sitting at the table and I don't know, doing exercises. Yeah, so there are many, many more effective ways of doing it, and we're going to talk about it later again. Okay, so this is it about intermediate plateau, and we're going to move on, and we're going to continue this conversation about challenges at this upper intermediate or lower advanced levels. There is a famous teacher and researcher, Jack Richards, a very, very reputable figure. I love his books, his articles. And one of the articles that you're gonna have in your folder, the one I send you the link to after the first webinar. So you're gonna find his article. It's not very long and it's quite easy to read. And this article is dedicated to these challenges. And he highlights 5 challenges, and he also addresses all of these challenges. So that's why I won't talk about each of these challenges, sorry, in detail. But I'm going to talk about the first challenge in detail, and others I'm going to just touch upon here very briefly. So there is a gap between receptive and productive competence. So we all know about this problem, and this problem is basically the center of our 2 webinars. What can we do about it? Yeah, so the question is, and this is what I'm going to talk about in a moment. Then the second problem is fluency may have progressed at the expense of complexity. Again, people at upper intermediate level, they are fluent. They are capable of holding a conversation. They are capable of talking about a variety of subjects. Yeah, but the language that they use, the grammatical constructions and the lexical range is quite limited, because they continue using simple words, simple structures, and even though they are fluent, they are not advanced because of that. Then learners have a limited vocabulary range, because again, to progress from upper intermediate to advanced, we need to learn a rough estimate of 2,000 words. To move on from beginner to elementary, we need to learn, I don't know, 800 words. Yeah, but here, or 500 words. But here we are talking about thousands of items, and this is a very daunting task. The next one, number 4, language production may be adequate, but often lacks the characteristics of natural speech. And here again, we are talking about collocational competence. Remember, in the previous webinar, I showed you some abstracts from my CAE students' writing. And there were some errors related to the limited knowledge of these people of a particular word. Yeah, so they know words, but they collocate them a bit unnaturally. Yeah, and this is what very often happens with these pre-advanced people, and this is also due to the lack of knowledge about a word. Finally, and probably one of the most difficult thing is are fossilized errors. If you have never met this before, so fossilized means that you continue making the same mistakes even though you know that this is not right. The very, very typical fossilized error is when your students say, omit third person plural, yeah, he say instead of he says. Yeah. This is a fossilized error, and we do have these fossilized errors at upper levels because we haven't addressed these problems before. We haven't sorted them out, and this is quite also challenging problem. And there is not a single solution to that. Yeah, so we have to re-teach ourselves in particular structures. Okay, so as I said, more detailed, you can read about it in the article in your folder, and we're going to address the first and the third problem here and now. So, a gap between receptive and productive competence. Here again, I address research, and there is a quotation by a famous professor, Stephen Krashen, whose theory of second language acquisition has been heavily influential since the beginning of the 80s, and it's still quite influential, even though in many ways it's considered dated. So he came up with this concept that more effort should be devoted to developing learners' receptive competence than their productive competence. Productive ability will arise naturally from receptive knowledge. And when you read this and you say, oh, really? Oh, really? So I just gonna listen, watch, and this is it. And then somehow I will start to use these words by myself. Yeah. Well, we have to take it with a pinch of salt. And the thing is that I decided to show you this quote just to illustrate that even very reputable people can come up with the concepts that are not particularly viable or that weren't really confirmed by research. Yes, there was a lot of research to test Stephen Krashen's hypothesis, and well, it's quite hard, yeah, but we know that, well, it doesn't work. It doesn't really work this way. So we are quite skeptical about it, because if it worked this way, then everything you had to do would be, I don't know, watching series, and then at some point you will just start talking like these people. Well, sounds very alluring, sounds very nice, but there are only very, very limited number of people who could really do that. So I don't know, they have to be particularly talented, probably, in language. So what can we do about it? Again, here, this is a slide from the previous webinar, the noticing hypothesis. So Richard Schmidt, the professor who came up with this, he said that, yes, so input, what Stephen Krashen said about input is good, input is important. Everything that you hear, see, read is good, yeah, but you don't take it, yeah, it doesn't become intake unless you notice it, unless you start to explicitly pay attention to that. Yeah, and that's why just surrounding yourself by language is a nice idea, but it's insufficient. It's not enough. And that's why we talk about noticing here. Yeah, and this is again the same quote I showed you last time, but this time with a picture of Richard Schmidt. People learn about things they attend to and do not learn much about things they do not attend to. Yeah, so we have to pay attention to language to start acquiring it. And noticing happens, as also a quick reminder, when we think about, when we see an item and say, oh, I have seen this one before, that's one, that word I used differently, and the context is new for me, and so on. When teachers draw attention to a word, when learners negotiate with each other, talk with each other about a possible meaning, well, this all, when we highlight textual enhancement, this is when noticing happens. Yeah, but even this is not quite enough, right? Oh, no, yeah, so just a couple of ideas about noticing in classroom application. So this is what Jack Richards, by the way, suggests. So when you identify differences between what students hear and the printed version of the text, yeah, so remember that we had the example of working with a script last time. When students complete a closed version of a listening text, closed version means that you gap particular things in the text and you ask them to match or to listen and compare, to listen and match or fill in the gaps as they listen. It can be also made by completing sentence stems from the text, that you take a beginning of a particular sentence in the text and you ask them to continue, yeah, to find this uh, sentences in the text and complete them, and by doing it they notice it, yeah. Or check off from a list of expressions that occurred in the text, so you give them a list of expressions and they either check them as they listen, when they hear a particular expression they check them off, or when they read and find these expressions and take them off. So this is just a bit of extension for noticing. And this is an example procedure of a listening lesson that I came up with. And this is how noticing can be practically implemented in a lesson. So you probably know that the usual outline of a listening sentence is that we have a lead in, then we have a gist task, so a general question for general understanding of the listening text. Then we can do some specific information tasks. I usually want to have particular questions about particular points in this listening text. And when we did this two listenings, when we work through the tasks, then we can study the script, and this is where we start working with noticing. So first, you can ask your students to highlight interesting fixed expressions, collocations, idioms, and phrasal verbs. Remember, this is what we did with you last time. I asked you to do the same with a written text. Students try to work out meaning from the context. And working out meaning from context is one of the most important strategies of language learners at all. But it can only work if the text that they work with is up to their level. Yeah? Because if there are too many words, students can't guess. And when the number of unfamiliar words is at the appropriate level, it is possible. And the appropriate level is usually 95 to 98% of coverage. So it means one unfamiliar word in every fifth line. Again, I'm going to talk about it a bit later today. Or they can also do a matching exercise. So they have an item and a meaning. So these exercises you can very often find in course books. We all do that. Then explaining items, giving examples, providing translation as necessary. So this is what we usually call introducing a word, yeah, or I don't know, explaining the word. Finally, you can personalize. Ask students questions related to a language item. And an example of a personalization procedure I'm going to show you in a moment. And in the next lesson, give students the same script with gapped items you focused on at the previous lesson, and this would be already a retrieval. And optionally, you can create a Quizlet class with gapped sentences from the script. So this is how you can build in noticing, retrieval, and creative use in your lesson, a lesson, and a sequence of lessons. And this is just the example from the previous webinar that we did with you. Yes, so this is just an example of a listening script with gaps, and I gapped prepositions here. But as I said, this is not enough. Again, noticing is again good. It takes us a step further, but still it's not sufficient. And there is another theoretical concept that we have to talk about here. It's called output hypothesis. Professor Merrill Swain came up with it a couple of years later after Stephen Krashen posed his input, yeah, so comprehensible input. So the more you listen and watch, the better you become. And she said, well, no, this is not enough. We also need to speak. Yeah, we also need to use it productively. And this is what her output hypothesis is about. Practice in using target language forms is necessary for learners to acquire new target language. Carefully structured and managed output is essential if learners are to acquire new language. Well, this is what we know now. Yeah, so to learn a language, to acquire particular structures and words, we need to use them in practice. How can we do it? Here I'm going to show you two approaches, or two types of activities. The first one is personalization activities, and we mentioned personalization already. And what is called forced choice, which is not a particularly academic name, it's just like a folk name of the activity. That's why I put it into quotation marks, forced choice. So let's take a look at these two things. Personalization. So take a look at this abstract from a book. Do you recognize this book? Can you write the name of the book in your in the chat box? I wonder whether you recognize it as quickly as I do when I see this layout. Vocabulary in use. Yeah, vocabulary in use. Exactly. That's one of my most favorite series of books of all times. This is English Vocabulary in Use Advanced by Michael McCarthy and Felicity O'Dell. I love these books dearly. I work a lot with these books on the courses, on my courses. And here you see a unit with a lot of adjectives related to talking about yourself. And this is done in the form of horoscopes. This is quite a frequent thing that we introduce vocabulary for character traits in this sort of funny horoscope thing. There are a lot of these adjectives, and there are very short definitions of the adjectives. And on the next page, there are a couple of exercises. But you know that this is not enough, so we know that even if we study this, even if we do the exercises, it doesn't mean that we're going to use them and these words become our active vocabulary. We all know that it sadly doesn't work this way, so exercises are not enough. I'm going to give you an example of a lesson and show you how you can work with this sort of tasks in a lesson. So the noticing stage is that students become familiar with the vocabulary in the unit. You can assign it as a home task. So they do it at home, referring to a good dictionary, underlining the words that they find funny, peculiar, particularly interesting, or particularly useful. Yeah. Again, just the same thing that we did with you last time. Yeah. So they work on their own and they notice the language. And then in the lesson, during the lesson in class, whether it's one-to-one or is it a group and you divide them, assign them in pairs, you can ask your students, what animal represents you? And then ask them a bit more of the questions. To what extent do the characteristics apply to you? What words would you choose to describe yourself and why? Usually people like to talk about positive characteristics, but they quite reluctant to talk about not very positive characteristics about themselves. And so this is there is a lot of space for speculation, and so they can discuss with which adjectives they agree or disagree. And as a second round of this activity, you can ask them to think about their best friend, partner, parent, family member, and you repeat the questions above. And with the second round, they sort of continue talking about these adjectives and about people they know and people they love. And again, it can turn into quite amusing discussion. But again, this is, yeah, so this is not, well, you can do some more things with this, yeah? Yeah, guys, sorry if there is a delay with the slides. It is possible at the output channel, so I checked it last time. So the thing is that it's okay at my side, and the recording will be from my channel, so don't worry about that. It may take some delayed time. Yeah, I'm really sorry, but there is nothing I can do about it. Yeah, so this is the platform, this is the system. Okay, yeah, so that was the lesson, right? You personalized in the lesson, and there are 3 possible extensions of what you can do about it more. And this is related to creative use. For example, you can ask your students to pick a celebrity everyone knows, speculate about their personality, or pick a famous personality, describe the character, but don't tell the others who you are describing. And the others should guess. And when I did that with my students, actually there was a lot of fun because at some point somehow people recognized immediately some celebrity, but at some other instances it was really, really hard. And again, there can be a lot of fun and can be a lot of creative use and a lot of personalization. And finally, you can wrap up it all with a writing assignment, and you can ask your students to write an essay describing their teenage idol and speculate about their character. If you're teaching adults, so yeah, it can be nice for them to maybe reflect on their teenage idols. If you teach teenagers, on their current idols. So you have like a lot of ways to make the task more related to your context. Yeah, so this is an example of how you can extend these this material. And okay, sorry guys, I really I can't stop to read your comments because that will take me some time, and that will stop the presentation, and then somebody writes something else. And so if you can, if you have some particular questions, so can you leave them till the end of the webinar? I'm going to address all of them. Otherwise, I'm going to read them all after the webinar, but I can't react them on them on the spot. Thank you. Okay, the second type of activity is called forced choice, and it goes like that. So this is a picture from a complete advanced course book by Cambridge, and this is the course book I work with a lot. I guess if you wake me up at 3 o'clock at night and ask me what exercise is on page 85, there is a good chance that I will give you the answer. I love this course book. It has its limitations, but well, it's a good course book to prepare students for CAE. So we see here a typical CAE speaking task. Candidates should pick 2 out of 3 pictures that they see and answer the questions from the task. If you can read the questions, why might the people be talking to each other? How might each of them benefit from this? And they also give you some vocabulary. Also quite a regular thing for a course book. So they give you the task and they suggest some vocabulary that you can use or your student use. But again, what very often happens, you like look at the vocabulary, you may even I don't know, so draw their attention to the vocabulary, but in speaking, it may never occur. What can you do about it? Again, our first preparation stage would be noticing, deepening the knowledge, and what is called horizontal phrase expansion. So, for example, you expand words to collocates, collocations to full sentences. So here they give you actually, well, phrases, not separate words, but still, if you look at this, bond with each other, it's not just enough to, the phrase is not enough to put it in a full sentence. And this is where your work should start. You take this phrase, for example, bond with each other, and expand it into to develop a close bond with each other. So you add a close bond, and to develop a close bond with each other. And for example, you take spend quality time together. And you extended these two phrases and then you put it in a sentence. And it could be like that. Thanks to spending some quality time together, the mother and the daughter may develop a close bond with each other. And this looks like a neat, complex, advanced level sentence that is relevant to the task because it also has speculation, yeah, so may develop a close bond. This is something you can work with further. This is a whole phrase. And then after this preparation stage, so you work with some phrases in this way, surely it takes some preparation from the teacher, because whether you're a native speaker, non-native speaker, still you have to think about how to extend these phrases. Yeah, so you may consult corpus, you may consult dictionaries, and so on. So it takes some preparation, of course. But then you ask your students to choose 3 or 5 phrases from the list, give them some planning and preparation time so that they sum up the work from the previous stage that we've just seen. Then they do the task. They describe the pictures, speculate about what is there, and answer the questions about the pictures, and use the phrases they've chosen. So this is where forced choice is happening. Yeah. So they choose the phrases, but they sort of make a commitment that they're going to use these phrases in their speech. They take do the first run of the task, have feedback from the teacher on, I don't know, on maybe some mistakes, on some inaccuracy, whatever you want to focus your feedback on. And then they can repeat the task with a different partner. We're going to talk about task repetitions today. It's a very, very useful strategy. But they change partners, of course, and you can also do it in 4, 3, 2 minutes task repetition. So for the first time they do it, let's say in 4 minutes, because a lot of thinking, a lot of processing happens when they have to incorporate these words into their speech. But with every round, they become more fluent and it becomes easier. And this is where they can really start using these words and phrases more fluently and in a more natural way. Okay, you can do it, and this is all very, very effective tools. It works really well, but there are 2 buts. One but is a quotation from another article that you're gonna receive in your folder. The decision to incorporate a word in one's productive vocabulary is entirely personal and varies according to each student's motivation and needs. So you may like one of the items and you may not like other items. So you can't really force your students to activate everything that you've taught them. And there is a second However, from me, insufficient amount of knowledge about the word and insufficient number of revision opportunities may prevent learners from using new words. They may be simply not ready yet. You just have to give them time. Yeah, so you may do all these things, and I said that they are effective, they usually work well, but you can't really expect students to just say all these words that you want them to say. Yeah, so it's not a magic wand. Yeah, it's not a magic pill. This is a strategy, this is technique that can work, that can be effective, but it's not something that will work in any circumstances. Very often, and maybe your experience confirms that, when you focused on a particular language and students couldn't produce this, well, in the same lesson or lesson later, but a month later, or a couple of months later, they start to use this language. Yeah, so they just needed a bit more time to process. Okay, now we are moving to our second act. And here we're going to talk about revision and recycling, as I promised you last time. We all know that, and there are 3 facts that we know all too well, that if we learn and don't revise, we forget. But to learn a word, and I put it in quotation marks because, again, so the term learn, yeah, it's really hard to explain what we mean by learn. Yeah, it's a very broad term. So to learn a word, we need to revise it from 7 to 12 times. So really these times are really different. Some people, some researchers say 6, some researchers say 20, so no one really knows how much, but a lot. Yeah, and we know that not a single course book can ensure that. That's unrealistic. Yeah, that's really problematic. And here we're going to talk about what we can do about it. Okay, this one I hope you remember from the previous time. Yeah. Do you remember what was the problem with this research, with this forgetting curve? Yeah, so the problem was that there was a good researcher, yeah, but he basically experimented on himself. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And that's why, again, we have to take this with a pinch of salt. Yes, we do forget if we don't revise, but we don't know how exactly. Yeah, and this is what I showed you last time. Factors that influence this forgetting curve. Last time I talked about it in detail. Here I just remind you that particularly repetition and retrieval are important here, yeah, just to eliminate this, this drop in your knowledge. But again, before we proceed, I want just to highlight the differences. When we speak about revision and recycling, is there any difference? Yes, there is. When we talk about revision, we talk about conscious effort, deliberate learning. We talk about vocabulary notebooks, flashcards, and the same material, yeah, and topic. So it means that we consciously do something about the material that we want to study. Yeah, and when we revise before the exam, we basically revise things that we've learned before. Yeah, so that's the same thing. Whether recycling, it's something incidental, something that is usually not planned. Yeah, and we associate recycling with extensive reading, with task repetition. I mentioned task repetition. I'm gonna talk about it later. And usually it's different materials and topics. So for example, if you have particular vocabulary items in the topic of holidays, then somehow in the next unit about wild nature or ecology, the same vocabulary occurs. Yeah, and this is where recycling happens. But both these things can be put into classroom activities, and I'm going to show you some of them. Recipe number one. You've probably heard that reading is good for you. The more you read, the better. The more you read in English, the better, and read as much as you can. But this is a very vague advice. And I adapted this table from another influential researcher, Paul Nation, I mentioned a couple of times. He came up with some sort of calculations, how much you can read and what sort of amount of knowledge you can achieve, and how can it be related to levels and word families and so on. So imagine that you read with 200 words a minute. This is not particularly quick. Yeah, it's quite well average average pace. And imagine that you read for 3 hours a week, 3 hours a week during 40 weeks. Well, this is roughly a year with some holidays. Yeah. And you in this period, you will read 13 novels roughly, and you will cover around 6,000 word families. And this roughly corresponds to a B2 level, and the corpus size, so the number of words that you read in this period with this pace will be 1.5 million words, and you're going to repeat these 6,000 word families for at least 10 times. Sounds not bad. And so we can extrapolate this to higher levels. So if you read 5 hours a week, you're gonna read like 20 novels a year, and that would be already 8,000 word families, and it will be roughly advanced level. And if you read 6 hours a week, 25 novels, 10,000 word lists, and it's gonna be 3 million words that you read in a year. This is impressive. We never really count it. We never really think about it because we don't know. Yeah. So how many words do we read when we read this way? So this theoretical estimation or estimate um, means that in a single year, it is possible to cover words up to and including a B2 level if you read 25 minutes a day, C1 if you read 42 minutes a day, and C2 proficiency if you read 51 minutes a day. So again, this is again not a magic pill. Yeah, and here again we have to say that it works. Well, your current level plays its role. It means that if you're a beginner and you read for 51 minutes a day a year, it doesn't mean that you're gonna become proficient. No. So your current level does play a role at this. And secondly, what you read is important, and you have to choose the right level. And as I already mentioned, so you should understand 95 to 98% of words, and it's roughly a new word every 5th line. But still, if you see these estimates, so I think it's amazing how much progress you can do by just developing this simple habit of reading. Yeah, so reading 25 minutes a day can make a tremendous change to your language. Yeah, you just have to pick what you like and do it regularly. You asked about that, and so this is these are the numbers of words, head words, SEFRA, and graded readers. SEFRA, Common European Framework for Language. So this is the estimate that I found in the Extensive Reading Foundation. Also going to send you a link. It's a very good web page where you can find a lot of free graded readers. The thing is that there is no official CFAR alignment to the levels and the number of words. I couldn't believe it, but I searched everywhere. I don't know. I really, I spend a lot of time searching for how many words correspond to what level, but the official numbers do not exist. So all the other speculations, so they are just speculations, so don't take them too seriously. At A1 beginner, the graded readers should contain roughly up to 300 head words, and this one proceeds to A2 800, B1 1,500, and then you see again, do you see how these numbers change as we progress to the advanced levels? Yeah, so from B1 to B2, yeah, it's 1,500 to 2,400, so it's plus 1,000. But at C1, it's almost doubled. And I can tell you that it does double when you move on to proficiency. Yeah, so it's not this need 200 hours, and or I don't know, it's not even. Yeah, so the levels are not equal of in terms of effort and time. Yeah, the further you progress, the more time and effort it takes you to learn. But this is the estimate, and this is what graded readers are about. So why graded readers are so essential for vocabulary language development? A couple of days ago, I wrote a post blog in Russian about it, and it turned out to be very popular. So there is a summary of the same things in English. It improves your reading fluency. Your brain learns to process the language and comprehend it quicker because there are not so many unfamiliar words, and you don't have to consult dictionary every second line. It gives you plenty of revision and retrieval opportunities, so you learn the words better because they occur all over again. Remember, we talked about this 7 to 12 repetitions of the same word, or even more. Graded readers can give you this. And finally, plenty of creative use. You meet the same words in many contexts and meanings, and you process the words deeper. Because the number of words in graded readers are limited, so this actually helps to use the same words all over again, and you learn these new meanings of these words. At the end of the presentation, you're going to have a link to a couple of collections of free graded readers. Yeah, so that's the question I've just had. So this is where I just have to differentiate between extensive reading and listening and intensive reading and listening. So extensive reading, graded readers, at appropriate level, we do it for pleasure. Yeah, we do it for pleasure, and it can be fiction reading at appropriate level. So for if you haven't started reading something unabridged, so you can start with detectives, modern short stories, and novels. So try it out. There are quite a lot of them that are quite easy to read. Think about nonfiction, popular science, news, agony aunt. Well, in The Guardian, there's an excellent agony aunt. You can find very, very interesting life stories. Podcasts, so podcasts for learners and podcasts for, well, authentic podcasts, BBC Radio for BBC Learn English. And this should be an everyday out of the classroom activities for pleasure. And in our folder, you're going to also find my personal top list with my comments and recommendations of what I recommend to read and listen at C1, C2 levels. And intensive reading, yeah. Course book tests, past exam papers, any kind of authentic materials. So this is where you work with vocabulary, yeah? So you focus on new items of vocabulary, you consult the dictionary, I don't know, you put these words into Quizlet and so on. So you can also focus on words while you're reading extensively, but again, this is not This is not actually the focus of extensive reading. The focus of extensive reading is just reading for pleasure. You read because you're interested in that, yeah, and you apply the strategy of working out meaning from context at when you read extensively. Yeah, when you read intensively, you focus on words, you notice them, and you work with them consciously. Yeah, so both things are good, and both things are working cumulatively. Yeah, so they work sort of together and they help together to each other. But very often, I guess that we mix intensive reading with extensive because we sort of want to learn all the vocabulary, and we start to, translate this every single word, and it's difficult, and it's daunting, and we lose motivation very quickly. So do read extensively, do read for pleasure. Just find something that is appropriate for your level, and this test of vocabulary science that you did can be helpful here. Okay, the second recipe, gapped sentences. This is what you can do in classroom pretty regularly. I recommend to start with as a warmer at the beginning of a lesson or a 5-minute filler at the end. So you choose 5 items you've taught recently, write gapped sentences with a target word or collocation on board, and ask students to write gapped sentences in their notebooks, and you check in pairs. I'm going to give you now 5 ways of gapping sentences. And they differ in their level of difficulty. So we can have one item equals one sentence with no other hints or prompts. So if you look at this, the flat is nice and so it's easy to keep clean. Well, I won't even ask you for suggestions because you see that there are quite a lot of words that can fill in the gap. And we don't have the first letter, so we don't really know. This is difficult, and difficult particularly you weren't exposed to this sentence before, yeah? So you haven't seen this sentence before that, I mean. So it's quite hard to guess. So this one is good when you've already revised some items and you want it to make more difficult for your learners. The second one is a bit easier, and this is what we saw in a trio task. So there is one item, 2-3 sentences with the same item, but again, I don't give you any prompts. Can you take a look and guess the word? The city is busy and noisy. It gets very in the shop during the weeks before Christmas. It was difficult to stay calm in such a situation. Any idea what it could be? Okay, you're gonna see the answers in a moment, don't worry. But this is also quite difficult, right? So crowded. Okay, thank you very much, Maria. A bit easier, one item, one collocation plus one sentence, and here I prompt you with the first letter. This is a bit easier now. So finally you have the first letter to have an idea of what it could be. And suburb neighborhood area. She had a well-paid job and enjoyed a lifestyle. Any ideas about this word? Affluent. Thank you very much, Olga. Indeed, this is affluent. You can make it even easier. You can prompt with the first 2 letters. Yeah. Roads are have a lot of traffic on them, so everybody moves very slowly. And I guess this is easier to guess, and I guess you know the word that I mean. Congested. Thank you very much. And finally, you can prompt with the first and the last letter. And again, you can do it as one sentence or a couple of sentences. A lively city with a lifestyle. A young and dynamic company. We promote, yes, this is vibrant. Thank you very much. And yeah, so these are the keys. And the first item I meant was compact, and the second was chaotic. So you see that it can be more difficult, it can be less difficult, but you choose whatever gap you like more, whatever way of gapping you like more. I personally prefer to use just the first letters prompting because it helps you to understand like what sort of word is meant here. Yeah. And I create my Quizlet sets with this. So I believe this is an optimal way. But again, you can change the grade of the level of difficulty when you get this. Okay, so let's move on. I mentioned task repetition. This is recipe number 3. You choose any speaking task from a previous class, and it can be any sort of task and any sort of level as soon as your students are capable of talking about something for, well, at least a minute. Yeah, so I suggest A2 level and above can be possible. Very good. It's very good if it's sort of storytelling task. It allows students to some time to revise the language related to the task, focusing on items they may have forgotten. So this is, we have a revision stage. And then they perform the task in pairs of threes without looking at their notes. Yeah, retrieval here. And you as a teacher feedback on repeated errors and forgotten items. So this is the procedure I borrowed from Hugh Deller and Andrew Walkley. But this is another version of task repetition that I also like very much, and this one is quite famous, called 4-3-2. It was invented in 1983, quite a long time ago, and what is more interesting, there was a lot of research on this this task, and it proved to be just superior, very, very effective. And it goes like that. Again, you choose a speaking task from a previous class. Again, it's good if it's narrative, but it can be anything. You give students thinking time and revising their notes, and then students talk to a partner on the topic for 4 minutes. The partner just listens. Then they change pairs, repeat the task for 3 minutes, and then repeat the task for 2 minutes. So every step you diminish the time for 1 minute. And why is it so effective? Because it develops fluency. Because when they repeat the same story, they start to omit irrelevant details, they activate the vocabulary, and they make sentences more, well, quicker, yeah, and they become more fluent. And really, research has shown a very strong correlation with the development of fluency. It also central to development of automaticity, yeah, so that we remember something very quickly and we produce it, yeah. It also increases accuracy because there is more sort of space in our memory to monitor our mistakes. And this task helps to store vocabulary in the long-term memory. And this is really, really essential. And so this is a very simple way, but this is a very, very effective way. And don't be afraid of repeating tasks with adults. With children, it's usually no problem, yeah? So if children like doing something, they will enthusiastically do it as many times as they want. With adult students, we are probably a bit reluctant to do that, but don't be, because it's really effective. It really works well for fluency, and it really develops their speaking abilities, and it strengthens this connection between the memory, learning of the words. Okay, all right. This one I'm gonna skip. Yeah, so this is what I borrowed from Andrew Walkley. So this is a revision timetable with a course book. So this is his idea to delay unit tests and revisions in the course books in a very particular way. So this is what you can do. Uh, technique, 4-2-3 technique in one-to-one classes. Well, this is a problem because I don't know how to implement it into one-to-one, because to tell the same story to the same person is a bit boring. And this is why I personally believe that teaching in small groups is much more effective than one-to-one. So, well, I don't know. You have to be creative and inventive. To be honest, I don't teach one-to-one for quite some time, and I have never really thought about it. And we move on to flashcards. So sorry, Ina, I couldn't really be helpful with that. Yeah, so flashcards, this is one of my favorite tools. I absolutely love flashcards, and flashcards are, again, a really, really powerful and effective tool for learning. Here I collected a couple of citations of researchers about flashcards. And take a look at this. Learning from cards is focused, efficient, and certain. It provides the kind of knowledge needed for language use, and it's good for both receptive and productive learning. Deliberately learned vocabulary becomes both explicit and implicit knowledge. There's a huge debate in the research community about explicit and implicit knowledge. To put it very simply, imagine yourself learning to drive, your first days at the driving school. So remember how you struggled with all these things you had to do with your hands and with your feet when you first tried to drive a car. So all the knowledge you had was explicit, and you had to think about your every move. But a couple of years later, when you pass your driving license, you become a confident driver, and you stop thinking about all these things that you do when you drive a car. It becomes sort of implicit knowledge. Yeah, so, and you don't notice that, and you do it, well, sort of automatically. Yeah, so this is the debate between explicit and explicit, and there is some evidence that by learning flashcards, your knowledge becomes also implicit, not just explicit. And there was a fantastic study when people were tested 10 years later after they studied a set of cards. So 10 years later, they could remember 25% of what they've studied. And when they were given some time for revision after that, so they were able to remember up to 100% of what they've learned 10 years ago. That was a study by Baric in 1948. And I think this is amazing. So flashcards could be good old paper or cardboard. If you are this sort of old school kinesthetic, so use it. I still have my cardboard cards, a huge collection of them at home, but it can also be electronic. Yeah, so my favorite is Quizlet. I absolutely love Quizlet. I think that this is an excellent source, but there are also Anki, Memrise, and there are many, many more. I'm sure you know more of these tools. So use whatever you like more. My examples would be related to Quizlet, because I work in Quizlet and I love Quizlet. So a couple of rules of good flashcard conduct. Give precise and short definitions. And here, remember, we talked about Collins Dictionary. That is really good at giving this sort of short and brief definitions. So Leo Sullivan recommended using Collins. Hugh Dellal recommended using Collins for definitions. So I also like it, but not exclusively Collins. I also use other dictionaries' definitions. Give 3 or 5 most frequent collocations. Well, probably 5 is a bit too much, but 3 is just fine. And give the first letter of the target word as a hint. So this is what I do, and this is what I think is more effective. We've seen 5 ways of gapping words just a moment ago. Provide illustrative examples from course book, from dictionary, from corpus. Now you know plenty of resources where you can take good examples. and provide visuals if possible. So Quizlet allows you to provide visuals from their storage, and if you have a teacher's account, you can upload your pictures. So sometimes I use visuals, sometimes not. In the video that you're going to watch, the first set was without visuals because it was sort of politically related to news vocabulary. It was quite hard to have some visuals for that. But the second set I show you is with visuals because there were again some sort of character traits. This is how it looks like in my set. So you see on the left, you see the word, and then very short definition. So self-important, have an exaggerated sense of her importance or his importance. A collocation, a phrase, and two examples. He was self-important little man. She was not at all self-important celebrity I'd read about. And I put Donald Trump as an example of this vocabulary item. And this is how an effective set works. You're gonna see it in the video that I filmed for you, but Quizlet has a mode. They have a lot of modes, but the most effective is Learn mode, and this is the first one. It gives you two things. First, when you start study a set, you just recognize items, yeah? So they give you, you see the definition, the gapped example, and then 4 options. And you recognize the option, you click on the option, and this is it. This is the easy stage, yeah? You just get to know the items. But then they start to ask you to retrieve the item. And so this is where you have to type the item in, and this is where retrieval happens, and this is where learning happens. And this is why I love and I value this mode so much. And this is what I demonstrate you in the video, yeah, so that they ask me to retrieve. Sometimes I forget items, I click and I don't know. They ask me to write the item, and then they put this item again until I write them down a couple of times until I retrieve them, and then they come to this mustard store. So this is really very effective thing, and this is really where learning happens, and this is how deliberate learning looks like. What can you do with Quizlet outside the classroom? You can send students the link to the set. You can set a deadline to finish studying in the set in the Learn mode. If you have this teacher subscription, you can monitor the progress online, so you can see who actually attempted what mode and how successful they were. And you can check what words learners have most difficulty with, because they show you the percentage of errors of the items. And the teacher subscription costs, I guess, something like $30 a year. Well, I use it a lot and I love it, so I don't think that it's a lot of money. But if you don't like to pay, you can use it for free, but you won't have this monitoring of progress, yeah. But I think you can work without it as well, yeah. Then, Quizlet in class. You can print out the cards, and Quizlet allows you to do it very neatly. So there are printing modes. So this is for those people who like to work with something really like tangible and good old kinesthetic things. You can do it as a retrieval revision. So you look at the back of the card and say the word. If students said the word correctly, they take the card to themselves. And if they couldn't retrieve it correctly, they put the card at the bottom of the pile. It can also be a backward revision. So they look at the word and try to remember context or example on the back. And here again, you can initiate a conversation and personalize. For example, for a word garrulous, yeah? Who can be garrulous? What would they tell you, and how to get rid of them? Yeah, so it's sort of again personalizing and discussing the word. And as a post activity, you can create a test based on words they learned or revised, and Quizlet is also good at creating tests as well. Another activity I absolutely love This is called revision domino, collective storytelling. So you print out several sets with different types of vocabulary, so collocations, phrasal verbs, nouns, words. So you all pool them together. You distribute cards among participants, let's say four to six people. With each turn, a participant should create a sentence or two with the target word on the card. The sentence should be a part of a story, no matter how crazy. And this is where really imagination goes wild, and this is a lot of fun, and people just laugh out loud. And this is a very, very engaging, creative, and funny activity. And the winner is the person who gets rid of all the cards the quickest. Yeah. So I totally, if you teach offline classes, if you teach in the classroom, so try it out. I'm sure you're gonna love it. So to direct and deliberate learning of vocabulary. Why is it so good? Deliberately learned vocabulary after it has been met in a message-focused activity, like listening or reading, means that it will be more meaningful and effective. So work with the vocabulary after your gist or specific information activity. Learning from context and learning from cards are reinforcing and complementing each other. So they work together. So again, as intensive and extensive reading work together. So learning from context and learning from cards deliberately, they also work together. Then it's efficient in terms of return for time and effort. So you learn really well in a quite short amount of time. It allows learners to focus on aspects of word knowledge that is not easily gained from the context or dictionary use, because again, depending on how you create your cards, and provide the kind of implicit knowledge needed for normal use. And it substantially speeds up learning. This is also what you can notice when you start doing it regularly. So you learn a lot in a relatively short amount of time. So it is indeed a very, very effective tool, and a lot of research confirms that. Welcome to my Quizlet class. I have an open class for everybody. I have some closed classes from my students on my courses, but I also have open class for everyone. And you're gonna see the link, you're gonna see the barcode. So go there, try it out, see how it works for yourself. And if you like it, start to incorporate it in your teaching and learning, of course. So remember, this is my final comment on revision and recycling. Remember that revision and recycling is the shared responsibility of both teachers and students. So whatever side you are at, a teacher side or a student side, remember that it's a shared responsibility. So you can't do it all alone. So you have to create opportunities for revision, and if you are a student, you have to take these opportunities and create these opportunities for yourself. Okay, so as a wrap up, your takeaway from the first part when we talked about from passive to active, so notice, pay attention to target language, try to reproduce it in gap activities. Activate, so plan to use new language in speaking and writing. Personalize, try to use language while talking about things that are important and interesting to you. And from the second part, revision and recycling, read a lot. Even 20 minutes a day can make a huge difference. Serialize, remember that a series of books or series like watching series are better for vocabulary recycling and learning than just separate books or films. Start or end lesson with a quick revision using gap sentences. Now you know how. Don't be afraid to repeat the tasks, and use flashcards. And this will help you to improve your revision and recycling substantially. And may your forgetting curve be orange. This is what I wish you. And we are almost reaching the end, but there is one thing I promised you, and I promised you good learning habits. So here is my recipe for good learning habits. So this is what I do myself, and this is how I actually learned well, how I reached, from this upper intermediate to the proficient level. So this is the way I've taken. Uh, so first of all, switch your TV channel. This is what, again, I took in quotation marks. What I mean is switching your phone menu, your Facebook feed, your YouTube channel, your e-reader to English. Maybe not everything at the same time. Maybe it will be too stressful, but if you take one step at a time, that will be helpful. So whenever you watch something, watch it in English. And this is my second advice. Never watch films with Russian dubbing. Just forget about it. Whatever you watch it with English sound and English subtitles only. If you watch with somebody who doesn't speak English, then allow yourself Russian subtitles, but just try not to read them. I studied, worked, and lived in Sweden for some years, and I worked as a school teacher, an English teacher in Stockholm. And well, there's like a lot of anecdotal evidence about Scandinavians being so good at language, at English particularly. And I was very often asked why this is it. And actually, being a teacher of English in one of the schools in Swedish, well, I saw that they don't do anything extraordinary. They have quite average course books. The teaching is very, very like usual and normal. There is nothing extraordinary and sophisticated there. But the thing is that they don't dub films. They don't dub movies at all, and they are exposed to English from a very, very early age on, and they are used to that. And that's why it becomes something very natural. Yeah? And I believe that a huge part of the success of Scandinavians of speaking English is because they don't dub movies. So think about it and try to avoid watching dubbing movies at all. Listen to podcasts, YouTube, talk shows, lectures every time you cook, tidy your flat, wash, iron, clean, water your flowers, whatever. We all do these things. We all have to do these things, yeah? But when you do that, so watch or listen to something in English. And if your folks protest, yeah, if your family disagrees, if they are tired of your English, buy Bluetooth headsets. Well, I got one as a present from my husband, and this is one of the best presents in my life because I put this Bluetooth headphones, sorry, not headset, but headphones, of course. And I listen to whatever I would like to listen as I do all my house chores, and this is amazing. I've watched so many lectures. I've listened to so many podcasts during this time, and this is just it happens on the go. I don't just do it. I don't find particular time in my schedule to do that. I just do it on the go. Uh, Try and read at least a short article and news item in English every day. So subscribe to BBC on Facebook or Guardian on Facebook. Download the Guardian free application to your phone. It's really free. It is so good. I read it every day for a couple of minutes. And finally, join Quizlet and study a set whenever you're procrastinating, fidgeting with your phone, you are in the public transport, you are queuing, you are waiting for someone or somebody. So whatever you do, just instead of checking the messages or scrolling the feed of your social networks, yeah, do a Quizlet set instead. You just notice how much you learn just on the go. It can make a tremendous change to your language. So this is actually how I moved on from upper intermediate to proficient, and I keep doing it every day. And I believe that this is what a a professional in English can do and has to do. And finally, remember that nobody is perfect, but you can be better than you were yesterday. And this is what I want to finish my, well, quite a long presentation today, so it was a bit longer than yesterday. And thank you very much for your attention. So all the references are there. So if you want to check out some websites, the articles I'm going to upload in our Google Google folder. There you could also find a certificate. You can print your name there and print out the certificate if you need it. And thank you very, very much for joining me, for listening to me. I'm really, really grateful. I really appreciate your time and attention. And okay, questions. So while reading extensively, sorry, I will, or watching film, should we, oh gosh, it's so hard to learn to read. Should we stop and write down new words with a meaning and learn them, or just guess the meaning and rely on revising? I guess that it's better not to stop. If there is a word that you don't know, just check it out very quickly and go on. Such services as Ororotove allows to add the word to your set, yeah, and work with it further, but this is optional, yeah. So I believe that just watching for fluency, particularly if this is the level where you can easily watch without consulting the dictionary all the time, just watch, yeah. And if you watch series, then the word will be recycled later, because otherwise, we end up with, with this perfectionism, like I want to learn all the words and I will stop at every word and write it down and try to learn it. You will lose momentum, you will lose your motivation, yeah. So just do it for pleasure, yeah. So watch for pleasure, read for pleasure, add words, or I don't know, I usually, when I check out a word, I just add a star to it so that it goes to my list of favorites, or I add it to a set. For example, in Kindle, I have this function, and in Ororotove, so I also have this function to add the words to the list. Sometimes I work with the words later, sometimes not. Okay, thank you. Can this sorry, thank you very much for thanks. When personalizing a particular piece of vocabulary where one could take ideas from, I'm not so sure I get the question. So do you mean questions like teachers who ask questions? Well, I also would say that this is a skill by the teacher that needs practice. Yeah, so you need practice in asking questions. This is again what Hugh Deller says a lot about the ways you can learn asking questions. But I think that when you begin with it, just plan the questions you want to ask your students, yeah. So on the stage of planning, and then with time it will come spontaneously to you, so you will know like what sort of question you may ask. Again, consult Hugh Deller's book. There are some rules and suggestions of how you can ask questions in a sort of effective way. So thank you. Do you create Quizlets yourself all the time? Sometimes yes, but I also let my students create them. Sometimes I try to edit them when I have time, but yeah, so I love creating Quizlet sets, but this Quizlet class hasn't been updated for quite a while, so I hope during summer I'm going to create some other Quizlet sets. 3 task repetition, the same partner speaks all the time. What about the second part? Well, they exchange partners, yeah. They exchange partners and they change roles, yeah. So one partner speaks, the other one is quiet. In the next round, the other one speaks, yeah. So you have to just organize the activity in such a way that they change partners and they change roles from a listener to speaker. It takes some time. It can take a bigger part of a lesson, but indeed it's very effective to do it sometimes. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I guess I haven't missed, just to make sure that I haven't missed any single question. What activities do you use with flashcards? Well, I showed you a couple of activities, just to look at slides. Yeah, so you can do it in class or outside the classroom. Depends on you. Can this three-phase approach only for advanced and for beginner and elementary? Well, these are things that are universal. Yeah, so this is how we learn words, and I just particularly focus on this advanced vocabulary learner because this is what I do most of the time. This is why I focused on particular problems that we have at this advanced level. But the principle works for every level. Yeah, so there is not a big difference between them. Okay. Okay, a lot of thanks. Thank you so much. And I guess, yeah, Kate, in 432, you speak about the same topic. So you repeat the same story, yeah, because this is repeating the task. And when you repeat the same story to different partners, so this is where you actually become more fluent, become more accurate, and you boost your automaticity. Yeah, well, you can use it at elementary level. Why not? Well, if we talk about task repetition, as soon as your students are capable of telling any story, you can use it and all the other principles. Thank you. Sometimes use cards with translations. Yeah, and when you're gonna watch the video, you're gonna see that at some points I just translate the collocation because it translates very exactly and neatly, and instead of a long definition I write the exact translation. I think that translation is effective in giving short definitions in many cases. Thank you. How to join my advanced learners class? So you're gonna have the link, so you can either use the barcode on the presentation or you're gonna get the link in the letter that we're going to send today, and in the folder on Google Drive you can also see there's going to be a Word document with the links to all of the videos and also the link to the Quizlet class. So please join. I don't use Memrise. Well, it's just a matter of taste. So I love Quizlet and I use Quizlet. Thank you very much, guys, for your questions. Thank you very much for joining me once again. It's been lovely. I wish you a wonderful summer. I wish you to have some relaxation from your work, and all the very, very best to you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.